Okay, I hope that after doing these reading assignments and after reading Marcus' story in particular, that maybe a couple of things have caught your eye as looking, well, rather weird or even kind of strange. You know, the Gospels, we're so familiar with them that we can start to gloss over them, and because we've heard these renditions of the Gospels proclaimed at Mass, well, you know, they become so familiar that we start to become a little immune to how strange some of the details are. I hope, especially by reading Marcus' story, some of the strangeness of the Gospel of Mark has, well, that you've been able to catch some of that. What about in Mark 11, when Jesus curses the fig tree? I mean, that seems out of character. That seems a little weird. Why is Jesus cursing a fig tree? And then when you read that Jesus is cursing a fig tree for being out of season, it wasn't the time for figs, so then just doubles the strangeness. Why would Jesus curse a fig tree, especially when it's out of season and it's not the time for it to bear fruit? That seems weird, doesn't it? Or how about in Mark 3, when we get that little line that so many people are opposed to Jesus and his enemies are plotting against him, and it's not just his enemies, but in Mark 3 we hear that even his own family thought that he was out of his mind. What's going on there? I promise I will explain both in this module, but what I hope to start with here is for you to start to see just how odd some of these details are in the Gospel of Mark. Now, the explanation for these two details in particular and some others can be found in the title of this module, Secrets and Sandwiches in Mark. I will explain the title, and I will use the explanation in that title to explain some of the strange details of Mark. We'll see this as we go through this. But let's start with the secret in Mark. Oh, there's a big one. There is a big secret in the Gospel of Mark. And let me just tell you right up front what it is. The secret in Mark overall is this, that Jesus has a secret identity. That's the secret. In Mark, Jesus has a secret identity. Now, if that sounds a little too much like Superman, like Clark Kent, has a secret identity of Superman, well, actually that's not that far off. Two nice little Jewish boys were the ones who came up with Superman, and they said later on, after the character became so successful, that they actually modeled their character on Jesus Christ. Now, they were nice Jewish boys, they weren't Christians, but they had this perception of Christ as this extremely powerful man. So the creators of Superman didn't understand the secret in Mark, but I'm making this connection for you at the front because there definitely is a secret identity. Jesus has one in the Gospel of Mark, and we're going to see how Mark uses this secret identity of Jesus to such striking purposes in his Gospel. It's only in the Gospel of Mark that we see this, so let's just dive into this and we'll see one of the main Markan themes that are not in the other Gospels, this secret identity of Jesus. Okay, in the last module, we started with Mark chapter 1, verse 1, the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. So right up front, Mark tells you what the secret is. You, the reader, you know something. You know from the very first verse that Jesus is truly the Son of God. But then as you start to read the Gospel of Mark, it soon becomes apparent that you are the only one who seems to know this. I mean, other than the demons, of course. We saw in the last module that the demons knew exactly who Jesus was, but it seems like nobody else does. We saw how the disciples failed to understand Jesus in the previous module. But as you start to go through this, you're going to see group after group, really individual after individual, failing to understand who Jesus truly is. It's as if nobody knows who he really is. Again, other than the demons, except for you. You have been tipped off by Mark in the very first verse that he truly is the Son of God. But then once you know that and you enter into the gospel, you will see that this secret is tightly kept all throughout the Gospel of Mark. Now you may be thinking to yourself, wait a minute, what about in Mark 1:11 at the baptism of Jesus, when a voice speaks from the heavens, "You are my beloved Son, with you I am well pleased"? Wouldn't that have been a dead giveaway? Wouldn't all the people on the riverbanks have heard the voice? Wouldn't they have learned the secret then? Well, no, not at all. You have to be able to read some biblical Greek to see this point, but in Mark 1:11, when the voice speaks to Jesus, "You are my beloved Son," he's using the singular, and he's just addressing one person. The voice is only speaking to Jesus. The rest of the crowd is not addressed. The crowd doesn't hear. They don't pick up on what the voice from heaven is saying. Only Jesus hears this voice. Only Jesus hears the voice of his Father speaking, affirming him as his beloved Son. So even though the voice speaks in verse 11, the secret is kept. No one else hears that except for Jesus, to whom the voice alone was speaking. Now we're going to see this secret identity of Jesus, that he really is the Son of God. We're going to see this secret kept all throughout the gospel. So in Mark chapter 1, verse 44, we're going to have Jesus healing a man of leprosy, and then Jesus is going to warn him sternly, Mark says, not to tell anyone about it. Jesus is healing a man, but he wants this man to keep it a secret. And we're going to see this repeated after many other miracle accounts in the Gospel of Mark. Jesus will heal a person, but then insist on them not telling anybody about it. Now, of course, this guy does go off and blab about it to everybody. He goes out and openly proclaims it, but all he proclaims is that Jesus healed him. He didn't know who Jesus truly was. He doesn't know the secret. He doesn't know Jesus' secret identity of Jesus as the Son of God, and all he can proclaim is the fact that he's healed. But this accounts for why Jesus keeps warning people after healing them not to tell anybody about it. He's trying to keep the secret. This is Mark's magnificent way of structuring his gospel. And so in Mark 5:43, where Jesus heals the little girl and takes her by the hand and says, "Talitha cum," I bid you get up. Again, right after healing the girl in 5 verse 43, he's going to give strict orders not to tell anybody about this. Again, we see why now. There's a secret being kept in Mark. Jesus' secret identity, and this explains why Jesus keeps insisting to everybody, don't talk about this. Or later on in Mark chapter 7, verse 36, he's going to heal the deaf man. And again, at the end of this miraculous healing, we're going to see this same stance of Jesus ordering him to keep quiet and to not tell anybody about this. Again, a secret is being kept here until the very end. Now, it does get out briefly, the secret, in Mark chapter 8:29. We saw that last time, how Peter starts to see who Jesus is. It starts to dawn on him who Jesus really is when Jesus says, asks his disciples, "Who do you say that I am?" Peter starts to get it. He gets halfway there, but as we saw last time, he only gets halfway. He doesn't understand the full ramification of what it means for Jesus to be a suffering Messiah. So even when the secret, it looks like it starts to get out, it only gets out partially in Mark chapter 8:29 with Peter's partial confession of faith in Jesus. Now, as you read through the Gospel of Mark, you'll see many other instances of this secret. I don't need to go through every single one of them. I don't think at this point for me to have convinced you that there's a secret being kept in the Gospel of Mark. And it's kept all the way until the very end. Let's look at Mark chapter 15, verse 39. Here is when the secret identity of Jesus is finally revealed to somebody else besides the demons. Here someone finally gets it. Someone finally, completely sees who Jesus truly is. Remember, Peter only gets there halfway. But someone finally makes a full confession of faith in the identity of Jesus Christ with the centurion who says, truly, this man was the Son of God. This is the climax in the Gospel of Mark. This is where Mark has been headed all along. Mark has been magnificently structuring his gospel along the lines of this secret and keeping things really tamped down until he can finally reveal it here in Mark 15:39, with the centurion finally confessing the full identity of Jesus Christ when he says, truly you are the Son of God. At least someone's finally seen it, but notice when he finally gets it, the centurion. Look at the previous verse. It's the moment after Jesus has breathed his last. It is the split second after the death of Christ. That's when someone finally sees it, when it's finally a moment too late. It happens right after Jesus has died. So the failure that I mentioned in the previous module, we see it extending even here. Yeah, someone finally recognizes who Jesus really is, but notice it's a moment, it's a second too late. Right after he's died, that's when someone finally sees him. And remember who the centurion was. He's a Roman. He's the enemy. He's a Gentile. He is a pagan. He is not a Jew. He's the commander of the enemy army that's occupying Israel. Rome has its armies all over Israel. Rome has subjugated the Jewish people. This is an occupying foreign power. This is the enemy. The centurion is a part of all that, and he's the one who finally sees who Jesus is. Oh, the irony just, Mark is just laying it on thick here. It's only the enemy, a hated foreigner, who finally sees who Jesus is, and he only sees it a second too late. It'd be like somebody from ISIS making this statement about the full divinity of Christ. I hope that reference triggers something in you, for you to see that for a Jew to have to hear this from a centurion. Again, Mark is just piling on the irony here, irony after irony, in Mark 15:39, the climax of his gospel, when the secret identity is finally been revealed. Scholars call this the Markan secret. It became really popularized by a scholar by the name of Willie Markson. He didn't come up with it, but he reinvigorated this explanation of the secret identity of Jesus. He wrote a book in 1969 called Mark the Evangelist. And in his 1969 book, he's building on really the man who first notices this secret in Mark. That was a scholar by the name of William Reed. And he, in 1901, was the one who first publishes his book in German on this secret identity of Jesus in the Gospel of Mark. He called it the messianic secret. Now, not all of this is held up. I mean, obviously, in the Gospel of Mark, Jesus is revealing quite a bit. So we don't want to overstate this secret in the Gospel of Mark. I do think it's there. I think it's one motif, it's one theme, it's one element in the Gospel of Mark. So not all that William Reed and William Markson wrote about this have held up, but this unifying element seems to have. That there's this secret in Mark that is finally revealed at the moment right after Jesus dies. Okay, so again, I think this helps to explain some really odd-sounding parts of the Gospel of Mark. Again, with Jesus commanding people not to speak about it. And there's going to be another episode that I think the messianic secret helps to shed some light on. And let me explain that to you now. Knowing about this secret identity in the Gospel of Mark, this so-called messianic secret, it helps to explain a puzzling couple of verses in Mark chapter 4. If you turn to Mark 4, starting at verse 10, the purpose of the parables. And when he was alone, those present along with the 12 questioned him about the parables. He answered them, "The mystery of the kingdom of God has been granted to you, but to those outside everything comes in parables, so that they may look and see but not perceive, and hear and listen, but not understand, in order that they may not be converted and be forgiven. Now you would think Jesus would want everybody to be converted, that Jesus would want everyone to be forgiven. Again, Mark is playing with this quotation from Isaiah. He's using it to his purpose, though, of keeping the identity of Jesus secret. This secret is only going to be revealed the moment after his death. But understanding that there's this secret in Mark that is being kept throughout helps to explain these odd couple of verses here where Jesus speaks in parables so that people may not perceive, so that they may not understand. What may they not understand? Well, now you know his secret identity, that he truly is the Son of God. Again, the other Gospels are not going to do this. This is Mark's master stroke as an evangelist in the way he is going to structure his Gospel and the way he is going to present his life of Christ with this organizing principle of the secret identity of Jesus. Again, no one really in the Gospel of Mark ever understands Jesus, demons aside, until it's a moment too late. Not the Pharisees, not the Herodians, not his own disciples, not even his own family, according to the Gospel of Mark. Again, this verse in chapter 3 about Jesus' own family, thinking that he was out of his mind. I know I have to explain that to you, and I promise you I will before the end of this. The point I'm trying to just bludgeon you over the heads with is that there's this secret identity in the Gospel of Mark, and it's the true identity of Jesus Christ as the Son of God. Let's maybe just make one more point about this in the Gospel of Mark. We've seen what the centurion says in Mark chapter 15, verse 39. Look at what the centurion says in Luke's Gospel. Turn to Luke 23, verse 47. Notice they say different things. In Mark's Gospel, the centurion in this climactic statement explains truly he was the Son of God. In Luke's Gospel, Luke's centurion says something different. He says there, truly this man was innocent. Very different statement. And it's really a much weaker statement what the centurion says in the Gospel of Luke. The centurion does not play the role in Luke that he does in Mark. There's no climactic, dramatic moment in Luke. Luke is structuring his Gospel differently. He's telling his story differently. His centurion makes a very different statement in his Gospel than does the centurion in the Gospel of Mark. Now, why is this? Well, in Luke doesn't have a secret that's being kept all throughout and only revealed there a moment after Jesus' death. In Luke's Gospel, lots of people know the real identity of Jesus. Lots of people know all throughout. I mean, if you look at Luke chapter 2, look at how many people know who Jesus truly is. In Luke chapter 2, the angels appear to the shepherds, informing them about the birth of Christ. So the shepherds know who Jesus is in Luke chapter 2. A little later in chapter 2, when Jesus is taken by Joseph and Mary to the temple at the presentation, when he enters the temple as a baby, Simeon comes up and prophesies about Jesus. Simeon knows who Jesus is in Luke chapter 2. Right after the episode with Simeon, still in chapter 2 of Luke's Gospel, Anna, the prophetess, comes in and starts to prophesy in the Spirit about the identity of Jesus. So lots of people know who Jesus is in the Gospel of Luke. That's why there's no opportunity in Luke for him to have this big, dramatic, revealing moment with his centurion, because people have known all throughout his Gospel who Jesus truly is. So that's why the centurion makes a very different statement in Luke's Gospel. There's no secret to be revealed in Luke. People have known all along. Without that opportunity, Luke doesn't have the centurion say what he does. Now, I can almost feel a few of you out there starting to get nervous. Well, now wait a minute. Why does the centurion say something different in Luke than he does in Mark? What's going on there? What's the truth? What really happened? Friends, do not get nervous. Do not become anxious about these differing details. First of all, the church has always known about these. It's not as if all of a sudden we're making these startling discoveries that nobody's ever noticed before. Do not get anxious or nervous about this. The Gospels all agree on the essential parts of the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. They all tell us the solid truth about Jesus. It's not as if one Gospel's got it right and another one's wrong. It's not as if, these differing details, now what do we think about the whole thing? Do not get anxious about these differing details. These differing details are there for reasons that we will see throughout this course, but they also shed really rich theological light on the life, death, and resurrection of Christ, having these differing details. Now remember, the gospel writers are organizing their life of Christ differently. They are utilizing different materials. They are perhaps addressing different audiences. They are emphasizing different aspects of the life of Christ. But the heart of the story is the same, so don't let this throw you, seeing just this one discrepancy between these Gospels. The discrepancies overall are really minor. Again, the different Gospels will have different women at the foot of the cross. Some Gospels will have 2 angels on Easter, some will have 1. Some have other minor differences in detail throughout the narratives. But as we start early on to compare the 4 Gospels, do not let these discrepancies throw you. What these discrepancies do is reveal rich theological insights that we will see as we go throughout this course. Now, someone who has made a big deal out of these so-called discrepancies is a man by the name of Bart Ehrman. Professor Ehrman teaches right now at the University of North Carolina. His recent books are probably the most utilized college textbooks around the country, which does give me a bit of concern because Professor Ehrman is no longer a Christian. He grew up as a fundamentalist Christian, but he sadly lost his faith. He now considers himself an agnostic. But he has really quite a presence on cable TV. Bart Ehrman shows up on cable TV shows, especially on the History Channel, all the time. And he, again, makes way too much of these discrepancies, and he jumps to some really unfortunate conclusions, in my opinion. There's a man who took Professor Bart Ehrman on, and it's that crazy comic, Stephen Colbert. Stephen Colbert has had Bart Ehrman on his show 2 or 3 times. And you know Stephen Colbert's shtick. He pretends to be this crazy right-wing conservative. In real life, Stephen Colbert is a very devout, practicing Roman Catholic, which is quite an anomaly among TV personalities today. But Stephen Colbert had Bart Ehrman on it, and I want to show you this video clip. Now again, you have to remember Stephen Colbert's crazy shtick, and you have to listen to some really ridiculous statements by Stephen Colbert. But listen especially for the point he makes at the end of this video. Now it does bog down a little bit. It is a little long, I will admit. It's about 6 minutes long, so hang in there with this. But at the end, Stephen Colbert actually makes a really solid point. Now he uses this silly example, as is his way of doing things, but there's a solid truth in this silly example that he uses at the end of this video clip. So let's watch this clip of Stephen Colbert taking on Professor Bart Ehrman, and I think crazy Stephen Colbert actually turns the tables on Bart Ehrman in this video. So let's watch it now. Okay, just a couple of reactions from me to this video that we just watched. Professor Ehrman makes the point repeatedly that Jesus is not divine in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, that he's only divine in the Gospel of John. And this is really a rather tired point. It's been around for quite some time. The idea is that Jesus is not divine in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, that it's a late idea, that it's a late addition, that it's only in the Gospel of John that Jesus is divine, and that this was a late addition to Christianity. Now, we saw in the last module, in the Gospel of Mark, the episode of Jesus walking on the water, that we saw evidence there for Mark's confession of the divinity of Christ. Jesus walking on the water, especially with that reference to Jesus meaning to pass the disciples by. We saw that this could be a reference to Job, and where in the book of Job, Yahweh does this. So by citing Jesus intending to pass the disciples by, this indicates Mark's belief in the full divinity of Christ, that Jesus is just as divine as Yahweh in the Old Testament if Jesus is going to do what Yahweh did in the Old Testament. So here we have proof from the very first gospel, the Gospel of Mark's confession of the divinity of Christ, that Jesus is just as divine as Yahweh in the Old Testament. Now it's much more developed in the Gospel of John, I will admit that. John develops the divinity of Christ much more richly and fully, but it's in the Gospel of Mark. There's proof of it in the Gospel of Mark. It's been there from the beginning. So we saw in the last module a proof to counter Professor Ehrman's statement that it's not in the Gospel of Mark any mention of the divinity of Christ. It most certainly is in the episode of Jesus walking on the water. Now, it is true that the category Son of God is used in the Old Testament to refer to people like King David or King Solomon, or even to the entire nation of Israel. That is true that in the Old Testament, the category Son of God does not have to mean divinity, but we can see that in the Gospel, in the Gospel of Mark, the episode of Jesus walking on the water, we see ample proof of the divinity of Christ there. It's really a rather old and tired idea. I heard this in the 80s when I was in seminary, that the synoptic gospels are earlier, they're more Jewish in thought, and no Jewish thinker could conceive of a man also being divine like God. And it's only in the Gospel of John that we get these Greek ideas related to paganism, the divinity of Christ. Several scholars have blown all of that thinking out of the water. I've mentioned to you a man by the name of Richard Balcom and also Richard B. Hayes. Both of these New Testament scholars have shown that that's a false dichotomy, that the early Gospels are Jewish and that John is Greek. We can see, again, from the Gospel of Mark, the earliest one, ample proof of the divinity of Christ. It's much more fully elucidated in the Gospel of John, but it's there from the very beginning. Okay, again, I think at the end, his crazy example really does have a profound point to it underneath all of the zaniness of Stephen Colbert. That reference to the elephant, again, it sounds silly, but it's actually making a legitimate point that no gospel on its own can capture the enormity of the mystery of Jesus Christ. God made man. No one gospel can capture the full range of meanings there. We need each of the four gospels. They're going to catch different elements, different sides, different aspects to the mystery of God made man, to the mystery of Jesus Christ, who came to suffer and die for us. So we need all four. Now, there are going to be differences in these minor details, but again, they're minor, and to me, having these differing details only proves that the gospel writers were not trying to deceive, that they were not trying to collude together to pull the wool over anyone's eyes. I mean, think about if some people want to deceive some other people, what do? They get together to get their story straight. They get together to make sure that they iron everything out and they stick to that story. the fact that there are these differing details in the Gospels only proves that was not at all operating among the evangelists. They were not trying to deceive. They were trying to give us the solid, honest truth about who Jesus was. Now, they're going to tell their story differently. They're going to emphasize different details. They're going to catch different details. But now we have seen why, again, thanks to that crazy Stephen Colbert, no one gospel can catch the full range of meaning of the mystery of Jesus Christ. Okay, let's move on now and develop some further aspects to this Gospel of Mark. Let me build on this point now that I think has been sufficiently made, that people do not understand or know the real identity of Jesus. Since no one really knows who he is in the Gospel of Mark, this is the source of the opposition to Jesus. There is opposition all throughout the Gospel of Mark because people do not know who he really is. The opposition springs from the fact that no one truly knows who Jesus is all throughout his entire life. And we see this opposition early in the Gospel of Mark. Notice it's Mark chapter 2, verse 10, that the authorities start to set themselves against Jesus. And this opposition from the religious authorities is going to, of course, carry all throughout the Gospel of Mark. It will be especially taken up by the Pharisees and the Herodians in Mark chapter 2, verse 13. And now, actually, those are odd bedfellows, the Pharisees and the Herodians. We see that they're united in their opposition and their hatred toward Jesus in Mark 2, verse 13. We're going to see them mentioned again together in Mark 3, verse 6. But the Pharisees and the Herodians, they were natural enemies. The Pharisees and the Herodians really hated each other before Jesus came along. The Herodians are the sycophants, the suckers up, the people who are just hanging on to King Herod. They are the sycophants and the public officials and the court officials of King Herod. Now remember, Rome is occupying Israel at this time, and Rome has set up their own puppet, King Herod, to rule in their name and to put a facade to political order. It's Roman armies that's actually keeping the order in Israel. They are actually keeping the peasants down, but they've set up their puppet ruler, King Herod, to rule. And of course, every devout Jew hates the fact that Rome's there, and they hate King Herod to boot. Now, to win over the sympathies of his countrymen, King Herod starts to rebuild the temple right before the birth of Christ. But still, Herod and his sons who come after him, who are also named Herod, the kings Herod, are kept in power by Rome, and they're supported by the Herodians. So they are the officials that are helping to prop up from below King Herod and his sons, who are named King Herod as well. It's kind of confusing, I admit, but there's more than one King Herod who's been ruling Israel throughout this time. But the Herodians prop up King Herod from below. The Herodians prop up King Herod from below, where the Romans prop him up from above. So every devout Jew hates the Herodians, and the Pharisees are extremely devout Jews. They are the Puritans, let's say, of ancient Israel. They are extremely devout. They follow the law assiduously. They have nothing to do with foreigners. They can't stand the Romans. They should hate the Herodians because they are attached to King Herod. But notice the Pharisees and the Herodians are together in this. They are united in their opposition to Jesus. They both hate him, and they both want to destroy him for different reasons. But the opposition from both the Pharisees and the Herodians comes from the fact that neither truly know who Jesus is. This opposition stemming from this misunderstanding of Jesus comes from the crowds. In Mark chapter 4, I've explained those references before. In Mark chapter 5, after the Gerasene demoniac is healed and Jesus sends the pigs into the swine, sends legion into the pigs. Then, of course, the Gerasene inhabitants come out and they beg Jesus to leave their district. Well, they do that because they don't understand who Jesus is. It's time after time in the Gospel of Mark we see this opposition to him. This opposition stemming from the fact that nobody understands him. Even his hometown of Nazareth is going to be opposed to him because they do not understand him. If you look at Mark chapter 6, verses 1 to 6, he departed from there and came to his native place, accompanied by his disciples. When the Sabbath came, he began to teach in the synagogue, and many who heard him were astonished. They said, "Where did this man get all this? What kind of wisdom has been given him? What mighty deeds are wrought by his hands? Is he not the carpenter, the son of Mary, and the brother of James and Joseph and Judas and Simon? And are not his sisters here with us?" And they took offense at him. Jesus said to them, "A prophet is not without honor, except in his native place and among his own kin and in his own house." So he was not able to perform any mighty deed there, apart from curing a few sick people by laying his hands on them. He was amazed at their lack of faith. Again, the opposition stemming from misunderstanding just comes episode after episode in the Gospel of Mark. Here it's the people of Nazareth, who not only don't understand him, they're opposed to him, and they actually insult Jesus here. Is he not the carpenter, the son of Mary? Now, we're all devout Catholics and Christians. We love the Blessed Virgin Mary. We can't see how that's an insult, but back then, for a man to be referred to as the son of his mother was an insult. And no man back then wanted to be known as the son of his mother. He wanted to be known as the son of his father. And so calling Jesus the son of Mary was a dig. It was an insult. Now, it's not to us, but it was back then. Again, we see the opposition from the people of his hometown to Jesus simply because they do not understand him. If we look also, it goes deeper than that, beyond the people of Nazareth, even his own relatives. If you look at Mark 3, here's the actual verse. Mark 3, verse 21, when his relatives heard that he had come home, they set out to seize him, for they said he is out of his mind. Now, I promise you I will explain that, but this is just to keep making the point that the opposition is just from everyone, including his own relatives, because nobody understands who Jesus is. That's the source of the opposition. But it's not just from this. There's another more sinister opposition to Christ that's operating really under the surface. There's an opposition between Jesus and Satan. Now, Satan knows exactly who Jesus is, but this opposition to Christ, this is going to reoccur all throughout the Gospel of Mark, an opposition coming from Satan as well as from the people around Jesus. There's going to be this punch-counter-punch going back and forth all throughout the Gospel of Mark. Satan jabbing, Jesus counter-punching, Satan never giving up but returning with another blow. Jesus parries the blow, and there's going to be this back and forth, this punch-counter-punch between Jesus and Satan throughout the Gospel of Mark. So the opposition to Jesus is not just from his relatives and the people around him. The opposition, of course, is deeper and stronger. It comes from Satan. Jesus is led into the desert. In Mark chapter 1, Satan tempts him in the desert. Jesus passes the test. He doesn't fall for the temptation. Satan doesn't give up. Right after this comes the exorcisms in the Gospel of Mark. These demons, these agents of Satan, are encountering Jesus. Jesus expels the demons. Jesus cures the demoniacs. Satan doesn't give up. We see this blow for blow, punch for punch between Satan and Jesus. Satan is going to use the Pharisees and the Herodians to attack Jesus after the demons are unsuccessful. We're going to see this opposition from Jesus come from every quarter. It comes from not just this lack of understanding. That's a big part of it. It also comes from the opposition of Satan. There's going to be this dynamic in the Gospel of Mark, this punch, counter punch. It's kind of like in that movie, The Untouchables. Remember that great scene with Sean Connery, where Sean Connery says, you want to get Capone? Here's how you get Capone. Capone does this to you, you come back even harder. That's the Chicago way. I tell you what, let me just drop this little clip in here. Let's look at this great scene from Sean Connery and Kevin Costner about the Chicago way. I think it highlights what's really going on under the surface in the Gospel of Mark. There's this punch, counter punch between Jesus and Satan all throughout. Here's the video clip from the movie.
You said you wanted to know how to get Capone. Do you really want to get him? You see what I'm saying? What are you prepared to do?
Everything within the law.
And then what are you prepared to do? If you open the ball on these people, Mr. Ness, you must be prepared to go all the way. Because they won't give up the fight until one of you is dead.
I want to get Capone. I don't know how to get him.
Want to get Capone? Here's how you get him. He pulls a knife, you pull a gun. He sends one of yours to the hospital, you send one of his to the morgue. That's the Chicago way. And that's how you get Capone. Now, do you want to do that? Are you ready to do that? I'm making you a deal. Do you want this deal?
I have sworn to put this man away with any and all legal means at my disposal, and I will do so.
Well, the Lord hates a coward. Do you know what a blood oath is, Mr. Ness?
Yes.
Good, because you just took one.
Okay, so much for the secret in the Gospel of Mark. Time for me now to explain the sandwiches in the title. Well, think about any sandwich. What does a sandwich consist? It's two pieces of bread around something in the middle. That's the basic structure of any sandwich. It's what's in the middle that really makes or breaks the sandwich. The bread's, out there to contain what's in the middle of the sandwich. It sounds like a ridiculous example, but there are going to be what's called Markan sandwiches all throughout the Gospel of Mark. What do I mean by this? Well, Mark is going to use a literary structure that is similar to a sandwich. He's going to have a 1-2-1 structure that's really like the structure of any sandwich. He's going to have something on the outside, 1, and then he's going to have something else in the middle, we'll call that 2, and then he's going to come back to a similar theme or a similar related episode, we'll call that 1 again. So a Markan literary sandwich is he's going to introduce an episode at first, and then he's going to switch gears. And it looks like he's just veering off into something that seems completely unrelated. What he's actually doing is he's giving you the middle, the meat of the sandwich. And then he's going to come back, he's going to veer back and return to a theme that's related to something that he introduced right before he got off on that meat or that middle of his Markan sandwich. This will become clearer if we look at some specifics. Let's look at Mark chapter 3, and this Markan sandwich is going to explain these really weird references to Jesus' own family thinking that he's crazy. Let's look at Mark chapter 3, and we'll see the sandwich structure, and I'll explain it to you, and everything will become clear here in just a few moments. So the first piece of bread, the first outer layer, the first element in the Markan sandwich is Mark chapter 3, verses 20 to 22. And this is where he came home, and again the crowd gathered, making it impossible for them even to eat. When his relatives heard of this, they set out to seize him, for they said he is out of his mind. So there is a reference to his family, to his relatives, who think that Jesus is out of his mind. Okay, that's the first element. That's the first slice of bread. That's the outer layer to this Markan sandwich. Now notice what happens next. Then Mark goes into this story of Jesus and Beelzebul, how Satan cannot stand against himself. All of a sudden, Mark just veers into this new territory of Jesus and Satan, and he has the reference to the strong man. Well, let me just read it to you. So we'll start at verse 23. Summoning them, Jesus began to speak to them in parables. How can Satan drive out Satan? If a kingdom is divided against itself, that kingdom cannot stand. And if a house is divided against itself, that house will not be able to stand. And if Satan has risen up against himself and is divided, he cannot stand. That is the end of him. But no one can enter a strong man's house to plunder his property unless he first ties up the strong man. Then he can plunder his house. Okay, now what's going on here? This is the middle. This is the meat. This is number 2 in this Markan sandwich. Again, this conflict, this back and forth between Jesus and Satan. That's the meat of this Markan sandwich. Again, what we just saw about the Chicago way and this punch, counter-punch. Here we see Mark explicitly referencing it. And Jesus is the stronger man who goes into the strong man's house and ties him up so that he can plunder his house. So here in this reference to the strong man, Jesus is saying he's stronger than Satan. Satan may be a strong man, but Jesus is the stronger one. Jesus is the one who's going to win. Jesus is the one who enters in the house, ties up the strong man to plunder his house. So here we see a reference to this conflict, this back and forth between Jesus and Satan in this middle part of Mark's sandwich, and Jesus predicting that he's going to win because he's the stronger man who can tie up Satan. Okay, so the meat of the sandwich is this opposition between Jesus and Satan, with Jesus the victor. Notice then we see Mark go back to the family. Notice he returns to mentioning Jesus' family. So here we see, let's say, the bottom of the sandwich, or the second, or the outer piece of bread. The first mention of the family was over in verse 21. That's the one outside of the sandwich. Then we had the middle, which I just explained. Now we come back and we see the other side of the sandwich. Mark returns to this discussion of Jesus' family. His mother and his brothers arrive standing outside, and they request him. So you see the sandwich here? 2 references to his family. And then in the middle we have this conflict between Jesus and Satan. So now that we understand the middle, we can understand the edges, or the outer pieces of bread. It's always the middle of the Markan sandwich that sheds light on the 2 outer episodes. This conflict between Jesus and Satan, this is what's going to explain the earlier reference to his own family thinking that he's out of his mind. Satan is trying to use Jesus' own family against him. Do I really think that Jesus' family thought he was really out of his mind? Of course not. But in Mark's gospel, Mark is setting up a Markan sandwich here. And he is showing how crafty Satan is. Satan is so crafty in this back and forth between Jesus and himself. Satan is so crafty, Satan is even going to try to turn his relatives against Jesus. Okay, does that make sense? Once you understand the middle of the Markan sandwich is all about this conflict between Jesus and Satan. It sheds light on what's going on outside the sandwich. This strange reference to Jesus' own family thinking that he's out of his mind, not for a second do I think that they really thought so. What Mark is doing is he's making an even more profound point here, that Satan is doing everything he can. He's throwing everything he can at Jesus. He's using everything against him, including his own family. Okay, understanding the Markan middle helps to explain the Markan edges of his sandwich. Let's look at another one. Let's go back to that reference to Jesus cursing the fig tree. We're going to see another Markan sandwich there. Let's look at Mark chapter 11, verses 12 to 25. Mark chapter 11, verses 12 to 25. We're going to see another Markan sandwich here. The first part is Mark 11, verses 12 to 14, where a fig tree is cursed. Jesus in verse 11 entered Jerusalem and went into the temple area. He looked around at everything, and since it was already late, went out to Bethany with the 12. The next day, as they were leaving Bethany, he was hungry. Seeing from a distance a fig tree in leaf, he went over to see if he could find anything on it. When he reached it and found nothing but leaves, it was not time for figs. He said to it in reply, "May no one ever eat of your fruit again." And his disciples heard of it. That's one piece of bread. That's one part of the Markan sandwich. Now, notice Jesus switches gears here and goes into this cleansing of the temple, which you can read for yourself, verses 15 to 19. That's the middle part of the sandwich. This episode of the cleansing of the temple here, that's the middle of the Markan sandwich. Notice in verse 20, Jesus goes back to talking about a fig tree again. What's going on here? This is where the fig tree that Jesus cursed has withered here. Now, what's going on here? It's the middle of the Markan sandwich that explains the outer episodes. So it is the fact that the temple has withered, the temple is corrupt, the temple needs cleansing. Because the temple is so corrupt and so shot through with corruption that it has withered, this explains this fig tree on either side that's withered as well. The point here is the temple system, people, most of them had completely given up on it. It was just so tied to money, and again, that's where the money changers are. The temple system was just so shot through with corruption that it had withered on the vine, and it was no longer a source of religious fruitfulness. That's why this fig tree cursed and withers on either side of this episode about the temple. You see the Markan sandwich? Understanding what's going on in the middle explains seemingly strange events on either sides of the sandwich. Okay, we're going to have some more practice with this. There are lots of Markan sandwiches in his gospel. We're going to do this in the threaded discussions. We're going to do this some more there. Let me just put here a list of some of the main Markan sandwiches. Now, there are lots more, but here you can see some of the principal ones. If they're in parentheses, that means they've already been discussed here. But I'm going to give you this list in your threaded discussions, and I want each one of you to work with these different Markan sandwiches for you to see what's going on in these different episodes. Remember, it's the middle of each sandwich that's the key. Once you see the middle and understand what's going on in the middle, then you'll understand any seemingly strange events on either side of the sandwich. Identifying the middle of the sandwich is always the key to interpreting what's going on either side of it. Now, if you want to read some more on Markan sandwiches, I'm going to give you another link. You don't have to. That's entirely optional to you. I think I've done a super job of explaining it with such clarity that you should understand Markan sandwiches now. But we're going to have some more practice with that in the threaded discussion. So, thank you for your attention on this module. There is a reading assignment, and then we will pick back up with these Markan sandwiches in the threaded discussions and continue to discuss this literary technique in Mark. It's how he's structuring his gospel. It's not nearly so prevalent in the other gospels. We're really in the mind of Mark here by noticing how he uses these sandwiches to such striking effect in his gospel. Okay, thanks again for your attention. Until next time, goodbye and God bless.